Hi there, this is Jessica with K&A Greenhouse. I am going to give you insight a little bit on what you could possibly plant underneath the black walnut trees or other trees that give off the juglone chemical. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I have a walnut tree, I can't plant anything underneath it, which is actually not true. It's a bit of an exaggeration. I personally live on a 4-acre wooded lot, and I'd say 90 to 95% of the trees that are in the forested areas and along the perimeters in our lawn also are black walnut trees. So I have a bit of experience trying to grow plants underneath them. Somewhat successful, somewhat not. I also found that when I was starting my research on getting started gardening here in the southern part of Wisconsin with heavy clay soil. We also have a sandstone ridge in parts of our property too, so that made life interesting. But the walnuts really created a lot of problems. So when I was researching how I could go about planting things underneath them, some of the lists on the internet were conflicting, where one source would say that a certain plant was tolerant and another list from a different source would say they were not. So of course, being the person I am and wanting to push boundaries, I decided let's try it and see what happens. So we kind of joke that at K&A Greenhouse I have the black walnut test property. And I did actually get a shrub last year from Monrovia just to see if it grew underneath walnut trees. So we'll see what happens this year with that one. But at any rate, this presentation is what I have found will grow underneath my walnut trees. It probably does not encompass every single shrub that can grow under the walnut trees. But this is my experience here in Zone 4, Zone 5, depending on the year. And also on part of my property. The front yard is a Zone 5. The backyard, because it's further down on the hill on our property, it's a Zone 4. So basically I live kind of on an edge of 4 and 5. Like I said, clay soil, we have a sandstone ridge, and we have a ton of black walnut trees. So this is my experience on what shrubs will grow underneath the walnut trees on my property. Okay, so the first thing to go over is what is juglone toxicity. So juglone is a chemical produced by certain trees, not all trees. There's a higher concentration of the chemical in black walnut trees, so that's why sometimes you'll hear people ask if it's black walnut tolerant. That is the tree that most people know have the chemical. Butternut, pecan, and shakebark hickory also have the chemical in them. It's just a lower concentration, so you may not notice it quite as much if you have those trees or if you have plants planted underneath those trees. Like I said, black walnut with a higher concentration, and unfortunately it's not just given off by like the walnuts or by the leaves, it's the entire tree. So if you have bark that fell off the tree at some point, if you have the walnuts that fall off every fall, as the leaves fall off the tree, they will also have the chemical in them, and then the roots will have that as well. So a lot of people say, well, if I just cut down the tree, then it's not going to be a problem. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because the tree will continue to let go of that chemical from the root system for, even up to 15 years after you cut it down. So the chemical will remain in the soil for, 6, 7, 10, 15 years after you already cut it down. So that makes it kind of a problem too, especially when, they're clearing subdivisions. If you're clear cutting a walnut forest and then you plant trees there, people don't know that they have the juglone toxicity in the soil until, they go back and talk to the builder or do a little bit of research. But like I said, you can definitely plant things underneath it, so don't take this as, oh, okay, all I can have is grass, because that's all that grows underneath it. There are other plants that are juglone tolerant, so that's a little overview on the chemical itself. And what can you expect from plants that are not tolerant of the chemical? Generally speaking, you'll notice leaves will start to wilt even in the middle of summer when even if it's not dry in the middle of summer. the leaves will turn yellow. They may drop off earlier than usual. The plant itself will have stunted growth, and then eventually a lot of them will just die. You will get, you know, a year to 3 years out of the plant, and then it just won't even leaf out the following year. A great example of that is actually tomato. People find out pretty quick if they have a black walnut tree because they plant, you know, a row of tomatoes and expect to get tomato plants, and the tomatoes are very intolerant of the juglone chemical. So that is a great indicator plant if you're curious on whether you have the juglone toxicity on your property. So you may be asking yourself, well, this sounds like a horrible chemical. What can I actually plant there? So the first thing that I have 12 of on my property, I think. I have a few boxwoods. I have one of the green mountains. I have a couple of the Chicagoland green. I have multiple green velvet, and they are all doing perfectly fine. They're growing. I mean, they're a slow growing plant to begin with, so don't expect a lot of growth out of them anyway. The boxwoods though that I've had are basically putting on about 6 to 8 inches of growth every year, the way that they usually do. The green velvet and the Chicagoland green are staying in their round shape, like you can see in the left-hand side photo. The green mountain is the one in the middle photo, more of a pyramid shape as it gets older. All of these shrubs are going to be fairly small. The green mountain will eventually get up to be about 5 feet tall, and because it's pyramid shaped, it'll be probably 4 to 5 feet wide at the base, but not quite as wide at the top. Most of the other varieties that we sell in the garden center will be the rounded shape. So we have things like Sprinter, which is supposed to be a little bit faster growing. The variegated dogwood that you see in the right-hand photo we did sell last year, but I can't seem to find it this year. I'm still hoping to be able to find it sometime this summer because it's a nice plant. Green velvet, like I said. We have wintergreen coming in, Chicagoland green, just a lot of different options for you if this is something that you want. And as a side note, boxwood is a broadleaf evergreen, so even though it doesn't have needles like an evergreen tree does, the leaves will stay on this plant year-round, so you don't have to worry about bare plants. And this one is fairly new to me and my property. I planted it in 2020, so this year will be basically its third season at my house. There's a couple of different varieties of beauty bush that we will be selling at K&A this year. The main selling point for this plant, I guess, are the berries that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here. The flowers are a light lavender color. You don't really notice them all that much, but the berries come out in clusters of very bright purple, and they will stay on the plant through a lot of the fall and winter. So I have these 3 different places on my property. The deer ate one of them down to nothing, so that one didn't come back for me. But the other 2 are planted underneath a gigantic walnut tree. It's huge. It's probably the grandfather of all of the other walnut trees on our property just because it's that big. But they did just fine in 2020. They came back last year. They leafed out a little bit late just because that's how the plant is. We are on the northern end of its hardiness zone. As a note, it is a zone 5. So I do have this on the front part of my property. As I said, that is where I have a zone 5 pretty consistently. So with this one, just if you do have deer and rabbits, just make sure that you fence it a little bit. But like I said, the purple berries are gorgeous on this plant, and you do get kind of a yellow lime green fall color on this also, so it really makes the berries stand out. This one is a shrub that I absolutely adore. I have I actually, my first year I tried planting this one, and I got it from an online source, so it came in about 6 inches tall, and I foolishly did not fence it, so the rabbits thanked me profusely for giving them food and ate it down to the ground, and it of course never came back. So in 2020, I got these in at the greenhouse. They were a larger shrub at that point. It was, 3-gallon size, I believe. I planted this one also underneath one of our walnut trees right along the edge of our property. And last year, the deer over the winter did kind of nibble on it a little bit, so I wasn't sure if it was going to come back or not, but it did send out pretty hefty new growth. It was probably about a foot of new growth, and then the littler stems that had gotten eaten, they did also leaf out. The real fun thing with this is it blooms on old wood and on new wood, so the flowers actually kind of were almost gave me 2 seasons of flowering, just because they flowered first on the old wood and then they flowered again a little bit later on the new growth. So I kind of have the deer to thank for that because I got, a lot of new growth. This is a taller shrub, so you're going to need to give it a little bit of space. I believe it's going to kind of max out between 6 and 7 feet around here in Wisconsin, 5 to 6 feet wide. There are a couple of different varieties of this shrub, so you can get just the plain sweet shrub with no variety. We usually get Aphrodite in, and there is a new one on the market from, I believe, Monrovia, but I don't think I was able to get that variety in this year, so hopefully next year. And another note with the flowers, you get them in summer, so it's not going to bloom at the same time as a lot of the other, spring flowering shrubs. You get a little bit of an extension on the bloom time, and the flowers have a very unique scent. Some people say they smell like strawberry banana, some people just say strawberry, some people say lemonade. To me, they smell like strawberries, but it's really kind of fun getting your nose in that flower and being able to smell it, kind of fruity fragrance. New Jersey tea is one that I actually don't have on my property, but I know someone that has walnuts that has it on their property, so I can kind of attest to that one. New Jersey tea is in a couple of my other presentations as well. It is a native in Wisconsin, and it's a nice shrub if you're looking for something smaller. So the New Jersey tea will get to be about 3 by 3. It gets these white flowers in June, right around the same time as roses are blooming. So it's a nice kind of combination plant with roses. If you like roses and baby's breath, but you don't really want to plant baby's breath, you could plant New Jersey tea kind of next to the roses as a complement. And the pollinators love this plant too, so this is a great one if you're looking to attract hummingbirds, butterflies, or any of the pollinating bees to your property. So hazelnut is another one that I don't personally have on my property underneath the walnut trees, but I have a friend who has walnut trees and has this particular shrub planted underneath it. Hazelnut is a Wisconsin native to the woodlands in Wisconsin here. It's a very large plant, so you will need to give it quite a bit of space. I think the mature size on it is right around 12 feet, and it's going to be at least 10 feet wide, so make sure you give it a lot of space. It doesn't like to, if you want to shear it or prune it to keep it smaller, I don't know that I would recommend that, so maybe just pick something else from this list that's a little bit smaller. But if you have the space and you want a Wisconsin native, this would be a great plant to put underneath your walnuts. Now this one I do have underneath a couple of walnut trees. The Harry Lauder's walking stick is actually a hazelnut. It's related to the Wisconsin native, but the main difference is, you can kind of see here in the photos, the branches on it are very twisty. They don't grow straight like a lot of shrubs do. So that's basically how it got its name. Is it almost looks like a walking stick, and that's people either will love it or hate it because it's just such an odd looking plant. Like I said, I have this underneath, I'd say 3 walnut trees, or close enough to 3 walnut trees. It actually does prefer to have full sun, so if you can give it 6 hours of sun or more a day, that would be best for it. But it's planted underneath the canopy enough of the walnut trees that it definitely is affected by it. The main problem I have with this one is the deer, for some reason, love to eat this plant. So I have to spray it profusely with Repelzol, probably 3 times in the winter, just to keep them off of this particular plant. But it is very unique. If you're looking for something funky, this is definitely a great plant for you. Daphne is one of those plants that people kind of only think about when it's flowering. I had the Carol Mackey variety of the Daphne for probably about 3 or 4 years, and then we got the intense polar vortex a few years ago. Um, and, and along with it, we ended up getting snowfall, and it's on my route to the bird feeders, and I didn't realize I was actually stepping on the shrub because there was so much snow over the top of it that I veered off of the pathway and ended up stepping on my shrub and split it in two. And I think the combination of the super cold temperatures and me stepping on it killed it. But it was growing close by the grandfather walnut tree for, like I said, 3 or 4 years. It doesn't grow very fast. It's kind of a broadleaf evergreen. It will keep the leaves through the winter, but then I noticed, at least with mine, it lost the leaves when the new leaves came out. So you will have, I mean, you won't have bare branches for very long. It's not going to be like the boxwoods that keep their leaves and then just grow new leaves on top of the old leaves. But it's a very pretty little shrub. You can see the flowers here. The buds are pink, and then the flowers themselves are white. They emerge right around Mother's Day, mid-May or so, and they do have a fragrance to them. So, I mean, you have to get pretty close to it to smell the fragrance, but you will notice it. And the other really cool thing is the variegated leaves on there. So it's a little bit different. I had mine planted in part shade. I know they will tolerate full sun. They don't like wet feet though, so don't put these in a wet spot. They need to be in a drier location on your property. Bush honeysuckle is another shrub that will grow underneath walnuts. And just to clarify, the scientific name of the bush honeysuckle is Deervilla, not to be confused with the invasive honeysuckle that we do have growing here in Wisconsin. I actually have that quite a bit in underneath my walnut trees in the forested areas, trying to get rid of it, but the birds love the berries, and as soon as they eat the berries, they're, getting rid of them all over my property. So we have the invasive honeysuckle on my property. But the bush honeysuckle is not invasive. There are quite a few different varieties, especially the last few years. Proven Winners has come out with the Kodiak series. The variegated one on the left-hand side is called Cool Splash, and the right-hand one is the one that I have planted. It's called Night Glow. So they all have kind of different colored leaves. Some come out orange, some come out that dark purple color. There's one that comes out with a red color, and then they change to the green. The Cool Splash variegated variety will maintain its variegated leaves throughout the season, and then you do get a really nice fall color with them as well. You can see probably in the top photo the best, the clusters of yellow flowers. They're a pollinator magnet, so if you're looking to attract pollinators as well, this is a great shrub to plant. And they're very tolerant of all soil types. They don't care if you have sand, clay, anything in between, and they grow in full sun to full shade. So that's great too. You can pretty much plunk them anywhere in your garden, and they'll just do their thing. They will grow approximately 3 feet tall, anywhere between 3 and 5 feet wide, depending on variety. They will spread by runners on the roots though, so just make sure that you give it enough space. Generally speaking, mine have only spread probably about 3 feet now, but if you see any that just wildly are coming up somewhere, you can prune them down, and they shouldn't come back. The 5-leaf Iralia is one that I have personally had underneath my clump of 8 walnut trees on the back side of my property. The plant is, I believe, also in my new shrubs presentation, so if you want to learn a little bit more about it, you can head over there and check it out. The 5-leaf Iralia comes in this variegated leaf form that you see here, and there's also a green leaf variety, which we will not be selling. The variegated form isn't quite as aggressive in its growing habit. I have both. The green ones, they shoot up about 3-4 feet a year, and they get kind of unruly. I prune them in the middle of summer, and then they shoot back up to 4 to 6 feet tall. Whereas the variegated ones have kind of kept more in a tidy growing habit. I think I planted them in 2019, and at this point they're probably about 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide. but they have the really nice variegated leaves on them, which really brightens up a shady area. Like I said, I have them planted underneath my clump of about 8 walnut trees in the backside of the property. So they will handle full shade because they really don't get any sun in that spot other than, dappled through the walnut trees. They will also grow in full sun too. So anywhere, 2 hours of sun, 0 hours of sun, to 6 to 8 hours, it's perfectly fine. They're also very tolerant of most soil types. One thing to note, they do have small thorns on them. So I went through and I pruned these the other day and had them kind of sticking to my sweatshirt because the thorns were on there. They're not as big as a rose thorn, but they're definitely still there and you can definitely notice them. So just keep that in mind when planting these on your property. All right, another one is Euonymus. And just a note though, to clarify, these Euonymus that I'm talking about are the broadleaf types. Some people call them winter creeper. The Euonymus, known as burning bush, is not tolerant of black walnut trees. The previous owners at our house planted them, burning bushes, all over the property, and every single one of them died, which I'm kind of okay with because they're on the Wisconsin invasive plant list as well. So they had, basically, when we moved in, there were sticks of shrubs with no leaves on them in the middle of summer because the walnut trees had killed them. However, this particular Euonymus, or winter creeper, is a broadleaf evergreen, so you will have the variegated leaves all season long. This is another one kind of like Daphne though. They may lose their leaves as the new leaves come out, so you'll get a new flush of growth every spring. There's a lot of different variations on them. These are the two most popular. The left-hand photo here is called Emerald Gaiety, and the right-hand one is Emerald and Gold. There are other ones like Moonshadow, which is the reverse variegation of the Emerald and Gold, so you'll have the yellow on the inside and the green on the outside. But there's just a lot of different varieties of this. This also can be grown as a vine if you would like it to. So there's some varieties that are shorter that really only get, a foot or two tall. There are other varieties that you can train up a trellis. If you lean it against like a tree trunk, it has the little feet, for lack of a better term. It has the little feet on there and it will actually grab onto the tree trunk and grow up the tree trunk. It also does that on brick. So if you have a brick house, you want something to grow up and you don't want, Boston ivy or something huge, you could do this as an option too for a vine. Forsythia is what a lot of people think of as the shrub that lets you know it's time to plant. This is kind of a very quintessential springtime shrub. The photo on the left-hand side shows the shrubs when they're in full bloom. So you'll often see these bright yellow shrubs. That's the flowers on them. They always flower before they leaf out. So you'll get the flowers generally on my property. It's right around the last week of April or so, depending on the spring. We tend to be about a week or two behind where Madison is in terms of growing. And then in the fall, it'll be green all summer long. Once the flowers are off, it'll be a green shrub. So it's basically like a background shrub. And then in the fall, you get the really nice fall color that's pictured here. It's kind of a combination of yellow kind of in the middle of the shrub, and then on the outside that sees more sun will be red or purple. So, I even get that on my property, and the Forsythia that I have are probably part sun location. It grows along the edge of my driveway, but I have quite a few. That's close to where I have my clump of 8 walnut trees. So this one definitely does not care about the juglone chemical at all. There's a lot of different varieties. The Northern Gold is the big one. Generally, it's 6 to 8 feet tall and approximately the same width. There are smaller varieties though. I have Gold Tide coming in this year, which is the dwarf version, so that'll be a 2 to 3 foot. Definitely a lot more manageable if you don't want a giant 6 to 8 foot shrub. But there's a lot of different options for Forsythia. Full sun is best for flowering, but like I said, mine's in part sun and it does just fine. Witch hazel is another one that does great underneath the walnut trees on my property. The the common witch hazel is the one that I have. I had two of them on my property, but the rabbits and or deer decided it would made a nice snack and they ate it basically down to nothing. The other one came back from that, so I've gotten smarter and I spray it with Repelzol and fence it off every winter. Otherwise, they'll just munch down to nothing. So the common witch hazel is the one that I have. I have been told that the spring vernal witch hazel also is walnut tolerant, which would make sense because it's the same genus as the common witch hazel. So I would think either one of those would be fine. I'm planning on purchasing one of the spring vernal witch hazels this year, and I will plant it on my test property just to see if it's tolerant or not. Plus, I really like the spring vernal witch hazel. It's a really nice plant. The common witch hazel flowers in fall, right around the same time as the fall color. The spring vernal witch hazel flowers in spring. So we'll see what I can come up with in a couple of years, whether or not that one is tolerant or not. But the common witch hazel definitely is. And for that one is kind of like the hazelnut. You need to give it a lot of space. Mature size on most of those will be at least 12 feet tall. Sometimes it can get up to about 18 feet tall, so it's almost like a small tree. Seven sunflower, also known as Heptacodium, that's the scientific name. This plant is very overlooked until it starts to flower in the fall. So this plant is basically like the Forsythia, where it's a nice background plant. You'll have nice green leaves all season long, and then in typically late August or sometime in September, the white flowers will appear, like you see here on the right hand photo. They are a pollinator magnet, and I will say the hummingbirds love this plant on my property. So this one basically gives the hummingbirds fuel before they take off to, Mexico or Texas or wherever they're going to head to for the winter. So this is a great fuel plant for the pollinators that need a little bit of the last hurrah. And then when the flowers are done, you can see in the left-hand photo, the pink color there is actually the sepals of the flowers. So you'll get first the white flowers and then you'll have the pink coloring. Fall color on this is not really all that impressive. Mine sometimes turns yellow and sometimes it just goes from green to brown, depends on the year. And then once the leaves are off of it, it has a really nice kind of flaky bark. It's not quite like a paper birch, but it has the strips of bark, different kind of varying colors of brown, so it makes kind of a nice plant for winter as well. There are different sizes for this one. The seven sunflower is the one that I have planted. No variety name. It's upwards of 15 feet tall, and I want to say it's probably 6 or 7 feet wide right now. That one's been planted since I moved in. That was one of the first ones that I decided I had to have on my property. There are smaller varieties. We'll have a couple different varieties that will be more like 5 or 6 feet tall instead of the giant 15 footers. So there are options. Full sun to part sun is probably the best for this one. Rose of Sharon is another shrub that you could grow, and we generally have quite a few varieties of this particular plant. It is a little bit sketchy on hardiness zone. Most of them are zone 5, but there are some that are shorter, there are some that are more columnar, and then there's some that just are 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. So really depends on the sizing that you're looking for, and then of course there's different colors. There's the white color, you get pink, or there's a lavender blue. Some are double, some are semi-double, and some are single flowers. But this one I have a couple of different varieties growing on my property, and they've done just fine underneath the walnuts, or I shouldn't say under. They need full sun to do best with flowering. Mine probably get part sun, 4 or 5 hours of sun a day before the walnuts, will shade them out a little bit. But if you want best flowering, put them in more of a full sun, 6 hours or more a day. And they don't really care too much about soil types. The main thing you'll need to watch with these is deer and rabbit try to feed on them quite a bit. I at one point had a couple of the blue flowering ones, and the rabbits ate them in the winter. So just make sure if you do have deer or rabbit issues that you fence them off until they get big enough to be able to handle the browsing. All right, everybody loves hydrangeas, right? It seems like almost every customer that comes into the garden center wants to know if we sell hydrangeas. Um, with the walnuts, some hydrangeas are tolerant, some hydrangeas are not. So the hydrangea arborescens is one of the tolerant types of shrubs. So the varieties of that are the Annabelle, the very common one that a lot of people are very familiar with. There's Incredible. The left-hand photo here is Incredible Blush, which is more of a pink, and anything in the Invincible series. So we've got Invincible Ruby, Invincible Spirit 2. There's Invincible Wee White, Invincible Limetta. So those are kind of your options for the Hydrangea arborescens. They will all have the rounded flower head. None of them will change flower color based on soil pH. I guess it depends on the variety, but most of them are going to be right around 3 feet tall. Annabelle and Incredible will be more around 4 or 5 feet tall, but a lot of them are going to be, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, something like that. And the other hydrangea type that is tolerant of walnuts is the oak leaf hydrangea. So you can see in the photo on the right hand side, the leaf is a little bit different. It, to me, actually looks more like a maple leaf, but to each their own. That's the fall color that you will see. So you'll get nice burgundy purple fall color, and the flowers on them are more of a cone shape and a little bit larger than like the panicle hydrangeas. So they'll start out white and then they fade to pink and then eventually turn brown with age. So you have the Hydrangea arborescens and the Hydrangea quercifolia as your two hydrangea options that are juglone toxicity tolerant. The panicle hydrangeas are definitely not. I did try them and they died that year. So I planted them in June and they were dead by August. I have some macrophylla planted. They don't really grow. They pretty much have stayed the same height, and they don't really flower all that well. And I don't know if they're not flowering well because they're the hydrangea macrophylla, and those don't tend to do as well here in Wisconsin, or if they're just not growing and flowering because of the walnuts. So that kind of remains to be seen. They've only been in the ground at my property for 3 years now. So I'll keep an eye on them, see what they do. And then there's also the mountain hydrangea, which is on some lists and is as tolerant and is on some lists as intolerant. So I do have a couple of those also planted on my property, but I planted them last year, so it's really hard to say whether or not they're tolerant or not. The first year they don't really grow anyway because they're trying to get their root system established. So basically they didn't die before they were supposed to, so that's better than what the panicle hydrangeas were doing. So like I said, if you have walnut trees, your two best options are the arborescens or the oak leaf hydrangea types. Okay, Winterberry is another one that is juglone tolerant. It's one that I don't have growing on my property, but I know someone that has the walnut tree, and they have the male and the female forms growing close by where their walnut tree is. As a note, if you would like the red berries on the Winterberry shrubs, you will need to have both a male and a female plant close by. I've read that the male can pollinate 2 to 3 female shrubs. So you will have the male, like in the right hand side photo, that will not produce berries, but the females are the ones that will get the red berries in usually late summer, early fall, and they'll hang on to the shrub generally until about Thanksgiving, give or take. Sometimes it's a little bit sooner, other times it's later in the season. It just depends on what the weather decides to do. And with Winterberry, they are fairly sizable, so you will need to give it at least 6 feet of space, and they don't like to have a lot of pruning done, so I wouldn't try to prune it to keep them smaller. So just make sure you have enough space for it. Winterberry is actually one of the shrubs that does really well in wet soils. So if you have a wet area in your property that you aren't sure what to plant and it's close by a walnut tree, Winterberry is a great option for you to put in there. And Winterberries do also have a really nice fall color too. So you can kind of see it in the right hand photo. It's starting to change just a little bit. It is a really nice yellow color, and sometimes you'll get kind of a purple tinge almost to it. But it is, generally speaking, it's just a really nice yellow, and then when you have those red berries on the females, it's a really nice color pop in the fall. Potentilla is another shrub that will do well by walnut trees. You don't want to plant these underneath, directly underneath the canopy. They do need full sun for best flowering. They will handle partial sun, so if you can give it at least 4 hours or more a day. There's quite a few different varieties, so height and width really varies based on the variety, but there's some orange colored flowers. The middle one here is ginger snap, which is a new variety for us this year. There's pink flowers, there's white, and then of course there's the yellow that you're probably most familiar with. So this would be an option for you if you're looking for a smaller plant. Generally speaking, they don't get much taller than 4 feet. Most are 2 to 3 feet. And it's a fairly low maintenance plant. Generally speaking, you don't really need to prune this, though I do typically recommend to give them a hard pruning every 3 to 5 years just to keep the new growth coming on it. Otherwise they do get kind of woody, and the lower half of the plant won't really leaf out much. So it's just nice to give it a little bit of a renewal pruning if you can. Basically any kind of cherry is going to be walnut tolerant. Personally on my property we have some black cherry trees, and we have, I think it's a pin cherry, growing along the edges of the woods. So, our forests are basically walnut trees, as I was saying. The cherry trees do just fine. So we have quite a few different ornamental cherries that we'll be offering this year. Nanking cherry is what you see on the left-hand side after it's, those are the mature fruits. We have purple leaf sand cherry that will be coming in that have the purple foliage on them with the white flowers. The photo on the right-hand side is, it's a shorter, I think it's 2 to 3 feet tall. So that's a shorter sand cherry that we'll have, called Jade Parade. And then we have another shorter purple leaf sand cherry that we get from Monrovia as well. So any of those would be great options for you. They'll need full sun in order to flower really well. And if you have like the Nanking cherry, it'll need full sun to get the best fruiting. But just check out the tags on them, and just figure out, sizing, something like that. Just make sure that you plant them far enough away from the canopy of the walnut tree to give it enough sunlight. All right, Fineline buckthorn is a controversial shrub that we sell. It is not the columnar or the glossy buckthorn, so it is not one of the invasive buckthorns here in Wisconsin. And I know sometimes people just see buckthorn and think all of them are invasive, which is not the case with this particular one. Fineline buckthorn doesn't produce a lot of fruits, so that helps, which is the main way that the glossy and columnar buckthorns spread, is by the fruits. The fruit that Fineline does produce is generally sterile. So you will, even if the birds do find some on the plant and then they eat it, if they drop it, in the property or in woods or anything like that, it's sterile, so it won't produce another plant. So Fineline buckthorn is one that I actually have planted kind of along the edge of my woods. I have 2 of them for right now. They're a nice columnar plant. So right now the ones that I have, I want to say, are 5 or 6 feet tall, and really only probably about 2 feet wide right now. They'll be a little bit taller and a little bit wider, but really not that much when they're mature size. So these are great if you need something tall and skinny. It also will tolerate full sun it will tolerate full shade. It just won't grow as fast and it won't be as thick as the photo here. It'll be a little more open if you give it full shade. Fall color on this too is nice because it's a nice bright yellow, so you get that pop of color too in the fall. Fragrant sumac, the variety Grow Low, is tolerant to the juglone toxicity. This is a nice kind of ground cover shrub, especially if you have an area that you need to do kind of erosion control, because this will keep the soil in its place very well. It grows very fast. The photo here on the left-hand side shows it's basically kind of fenced in by the concrete on all 4 sides. which serves as a reminder that that's not necessarily a bad idea. This plant does run quite a bit, so it will, I don't want to say take over because it won't run that much, it's not invasive, but you will need to give it quite a bit of space in order to do what it does best. And this one also has really nice fall color. You can see on the right hand side, it's kind of a mix of red and orange, so you will get that pop of color in the fall too to kind of extend the life on the landscape. And Steakhorn sumac is another one that I can definitely attest to being juglone-tolerant. We have the native Steakhorn sumac. We don't have tiger eyes on our property, but the Steakhorn sumac is growing along the edges of our property where the county owned the forested land and the prairies there. And they do really well. They do what they're supposed to do. They kind of form almost a hedge, and then the little runners that come up from the root system, they grow into our lawn really well. So I will occasionally see a Steakhorn sumac trying to mark its territory in the middle of my lawn. So those are easy enough. I just prune them off, and when the lawn gets cut, then it just cuts it off basically too. So with tiger eyes, the main difference is the foliage on it is more of a lime green instead of or just an emerald green color. This will still basically send out runners, which when it was first put on the market, it was said that this will not spread. It's not going to spread by runners. It's just going to be a nice little tree or shrub, depending on how you prune it. But unfortunately, that has not been the case. So you do need to make sure if you plant this, you're aware that it will send out runners. Won't send out as many as just the plain Steakhorn sumac, but you will still need to be aware of the tiger eyes trying to shoot up runners, sometimes in your lawn or elsewhere in your gardens. Fall color on this one is really nice. It's going to be a nice orange color, and then you have the red fruits that hang on in late summer into fall as well. Elderberry is one that is native or nativar. I personally have the native elderberry along the edges of my woods, and they do just fine underneath our walnut trees. I had lemony lace, which is the left-hand photo with the yellow foliage. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way that I had verticillium wilt in my soil there, so the verticillium wilt actually killed that particular plant. But the varieties of the native elderberry are also tolerant of black walnut. One of my coworkers has Instant Karma, which is a variegated form, and she said that one's doing really well underneath her walnut tree. There's other varieties like black lace, or there's a couple of columnar forms that have you can see in the center photo, that have the purple foliage. So there's definitely a lot of different options for you based on height and width of what you're looking for. The native one is going to be the biggest, which I believe 10 to 12 feet is the mature size on that one. So that you'll need to give a little more space, but the varieties are bred to be a little bit smaller, so that might be a better option for you if you have a smaller garden space. And Snowberry is one that I put in my gardens probably the first year, maybe the second year that I had started gardening out here and killing the lawn basically. Snowberry gets, you see the center photo here, very small pink buds and then white flowers. You don't really notice them all that much. The foliage on them are kind of a blue-green color. So that's a little bit different in the landscape. And then in late summer, early fall is when you really notice the berries. So the right-hand photo is the one that I have. It's just the white berries on it. They're starting to breed the snowberries now so that they have a pink berry instead of the white berries. So that's definitely two options for you. Generally, they tend to prefer part sun to even full shade. I have mine in full shade. They're just not quite as big as they would be if I had them in a little bit more sun. But they're underneath two fairly large walnut trees, and they do just fine. They're very hardy too. I remember when I was at school in college up at UW-Stevens Point, they had them planted along one of the buildings up there. And it's not exactly warm up at Stevens Point in the winter. I can attest to that. So definitely hardy if you're looking for a hardier plant with a little bit of berries, a little bit of extra color for you in late fall. So it should be noted, not all viburnum are tolerant to juglone toxicity. Korean spice viburnum, however, are, and the Korean spice you may be familiar with. They generally they'll get the pink buds and then the white flowers, and they have a very strong, spicy kind of lilac fragrance to them. They always bloom right around Mother's Day. And then they'll have, you know, the green foliage all season long, and in fall they're a really nice red burgundy color, which is what you can see in the right hand photo. So we usually try to get in a couple different varieties of Korean spice. There's some that are quite tall. People use them as hedges. There's other varieties that are a little bit shorter that you can kind of use as an accent plant, put on the corner by a porch if you want to smell the fragrance from your porch or kitchen window, something like that. So definitely a lot of options for you. Full sun is best for flowering and for fall color. The one that I have planted is fairly close to the grandfather walnut that I have on the property. It's probably about 10 feet away from the trunk. So it really doesn't get a lot of sun. It's on the south side of that canopy though, so it really gets morning sun and then a lot of afternoon shade. The fall color on it is quite muted. So it's more of like a pinky red instead of the dark red color. But I still get the flowers. One thing with the Korean spice viburnum, the rabbits and deer both love this plant. So you need to make sure to do something to keep them from eating this shrub. Otherwise they'll munch it down to the ground. But it's a beautiful plant. It's one of my favorites. And walnut tolerant, so that's a great thing in my book too. So that is kind of what I have growing on my property underneath my walnuts. Here is a short list of plants that are on some of the lists from other sources on the internet saying possibly. Some of them are not sure. Like there's a list out there that says, I don't know, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. It's hard to say. But there's the nannyberry viburnum that is native in Wisconsin that may be tolerant. Double-filed viburnum, I actually have planted by the cluster of 8 walnut trees, and that one never really grows. So I planted it, and it's been the same size for the last probably 5 years since I planted it. So it doesn't die, but it doesn't really grow, and it doesn't flower, I think because I have it in too much shade. So that we're not really sure if it's tolerant or not. Hypericum is actually the one that I got as a sample from Monrovia last year, so that trial is ongoing. I planted that one in, I believe it was July, possibly August of last year. So we'll see if it comes back this year, if it flowers, anything like that. Coralberry is related to Snowberry. I don't know if it's on the list or not. I've only ever seen Snowberry, and I haven't tried to plant Coralberry on my property, so I'm not sure if that one is or not, but it is the same genus as Snowberry, so possibly. I've seen Serviceberry on a lot of lists saying that it's tolerant. However, I have planted them, and one of my friends planted some close to her walnuts, and they don't really do very well. They seem to grow probably about 3 years, and then they start to taper off. And I have one of the tree forms planted probably 20 or 30 feet away from the big guy, and that one is slowly dying back. Like it was a clump form, and now of the 5 branches coming out from the base, there's only 2 that are still alive. So that could be kind of sketchy in my book in terms of hardiness. Deutzia is one that's also questionable. I have 3 of them planted on my property, and they're doing pretty well, but I think they may be far enough away from the walnuts that they may not actually be affected all that much by the walnut trees. But they are on some of the lists saying that they're tolerant, so that again, I'm not entirely sure. The spirea, bridal spireas are definitely not. But there's a few varieties like Glow Girl I have planted underneath the cluster of 8, and they seem to be doing pretty well. I planted them either 2019 or 2020, and they came back the last few seasons. So that one might actually be. I'm not sure about any of the other ones because I don't generally plant a lot of spirea, but that could be something that you could try too. I have gray dogwood planted along our property line, trying to get rid of all the honeysuckle, so I keep trying to plant native stuff, you know, in the woods instead. Gray dogwood is one that also doesn't really grow. And it doesn't help that it keeps getting eaten by the deer. So I don't know if it's not really getting bigger because the deer keep eating it down or because the walnuts are keeping it from getting much bigger. All of the other dogwoods that I've planted, like the red twig dogwood and the yellow twig dogwoods, things like that, the shrub forms, they have all died. Pagoda dogwood, the tree form, is tolerant though. So I have that one pretty close to the edge of my property too, and that one, the pagoda dogwood, is doing really well. Gray dogwood though, it's a question. Bladdernut is new to us this year. It's on the walnut tolerant list. I don't have personal experience with it, so I don't know. I hope to be able to put it in one of my beds just to see in the next few years what happens. And buttonbush is also one that's on some lists and not on others. I have them underneath the walnut trees on the edge of our property, and they seem to be doing fairly well. So that one is one that I would probably say is okay. The one caveat with though, buttonbush prefer to have moist to wet soils, and if it's planted too close to a walnut tree, the walnuts will kind of suck up all that water. So it might not be a great place if you want to put it too close to the root system of the walnuts, but maybe farther out. That might be a better option. So that's pretty much what I have for you. Like I said, it's definitely not a conclusive list of everything that is walnut tolerant, but it's what I have grown on my property, or a couple of my friends that have walnuts have, certain shrubs planted on their property by their walnut trees. So if you do have questions about any of these, feel free to give us a shout. You can either call us at either location, or you can email us at knagreenhouse@gmail.com. If you have a question for me personally, you can email and just put "Attention Jessica" in the subject line, and I'll be sure to get back to you. So hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any that you know of on your property that grow well underneath walnut trees. I would love to hear if I can grow something else on my property, because Lord knows I need more gardens. Thanks so much.